If one does not learn about China from the continuity of its long history, there's no way for him or her to understand ancient China, modern China, or China in the future. So says Chinese President Xi Jinping on June the 2nd during a high-profile meeting on cultural inheritance and development. What distinguishes Chinese civilization? How has it shaped the unique value system of the Chinese? And what relevance does this have on countries in the world? Welcome to a special edition of The Point with me, Li Xin, coming to you from Beijing. In this edition, let's revisit 3 cases of cultural exchange between people from the West and China to hear their experiences and perspectives on Chinese culture and civilization. I'll begin with the account of the first foreign dean of political science faculty in a mainland university. Canadian scholar Daniel Bell was educated in Canada and the UK before moving to the Chinese mainland 20 years ago. After teaching for a few years, he was made Dean of the School of Political Science and Public Administration at Shandong University in eastern China from 2017 to 2022. He has since written a book about his experience titled The Dean of Shandong. I started by asking Daniel Bell about his impression of the province of Shandong, the birthplace of the great Chinese philosophers such as Confucius and Mencius.
China is a very diverse place, as you know, and Confucianism does have impact throughout pretty much all of China, but its impact is much more deeply felt, I think, in Shandong in very concrete ways. I mean, if you look at the license plate for Shandong, it has the character for Lu, which is from the ancient Lu Guo, where Confucius is from. So they're very proud of their Confucian heritage. For example, the party secretary of the Qingdao branch of Shandong University, who persuaded me to come and serve as dean. He himself is a 76th descendant of Confucius. His name is Kong, which in Chinese, of course, Confucius is Kongzi. Part of the agenda was to help to promote Confucianism in the university, and there's a much more receptive kind of environment for that. So that's a very important push factor. But I think the way that the students too, I mean, the students, I mean, I did serve also, I worked at Tsinghua University in Beijing for 13 years. And I find the students in Shandong, frankly, are harder working and more dedicated to learning than anywhere I've been. And I think that's part of the influence of Confucianism too. And if you just go in there and you think, oh, they're very shy and they're not willing to express their views, but that's not at all true. I mean, in line with kind of this Confucian ethics, where there's a desire to first learn the material and show appreciation, and only then to express their own viewpoint, and that's much more deeply felt, I think, at Shandong. I mean, at Tsinghua and Beida, Peking University, students are great, but often they're kind of almost too willing to express their views without having deep understanding of the material, whereas I think in Shandong, it's not the case as much.
You talk about Confucianism, and you talked in your book about how you had to teach in English Confucianism to foreign students and in Chinese Confucianism to Chinese students. What kind of process is that? Is that like, I mean, for me, do things get lost in translation, for instance? And if you're going to teach us one sentence from Confucius, what would it be? What do you think is the overarching sentence that can help people understand what Confucianism is all about?
Because there's so many misunderstandings of Confucianism in the West. People think it's like the master said, and then people blindly follow, and then you should all conform and think in the same way. But that's why, like, literally every Chinese intellectual knows this saying, 君子和而不同, which means that exemplary persons should value. We're going to translate 和 as diversity and harmony, not as harmony, because in English, when you hear the word harmony, it sounds like conformity or uniformity or sameness. But in Chinese, you explicitly distinguish between 和, which we can translate as diversity and harmony, and 同, which means sameness, or conformity. So there's very famous saying in the Analects of Confucius that exemplary persons should value diversity and harmony, but not sameness. Whereas xiaoren, or petty people, they value sameness, conformity, rather than diversity and harmony. I think that's and that's the issue. I mean, and through various metaphors, like think of drinking soup. The soup, if it has different ingredients, it's much better than if it only has one ingredient. Or music sounds better. In English, actually, the word harmony is this way in music. If it sounds better, if it has different kind of harmonious notes. But also it has a political view too. I mean, originally in the Zhuan, a very ancient text, it referred to the idea that the ruler should listen to diverse views of his advisors, because that's the only way in which mistakes can be corrected.
Yeah.
So I think that's a beautiful thing. That's very well. And also just in the 2008 Olympics, remember in Beijing, the opening ceremony, what was the character that was meant to represent Chinese culture? Character. Diversity and harmony.
Diversity and harmony. I noticed, Professor Bell, in your book, you wanted to de-demonize China, the ruling party, and members of the ruling party, which is the CCP or CPC, depending on how you call it. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to do that?
Well, I mean, as I'm sure you know, in the U.S. especially, I'm from Canada, but the word communist sounds so bad. It's like it's like a boogeyman, So if you say, that if you want to say something bad about China, you just refer to the Communist Party, and it sounds so terrible. And even in Canada, where I'm from now, it's like there's so much on the news about how this Communist Party wants to infiltrate Canada and affect the political process, and people think of it as this kind of monolithic, evil force. But most of the leaders that I dealt with are members of the Communist Party, and what I see is the willingness to work hard and serve the community. Of course, they have very diverse views. I mean, the party itself, even the word is misleading. Think of it as a huge organization of over 90 million people with diverse views. And most of the people that I know, are very admirable. Of course, people are flawed like everywhere else. So by showing some of that interaction with Communist Party leaders in the book, I do hope to show a different side, a more humane side. And it's also true that there's been a transformation in China. I mean, in the 1980s, many high-performing students didn't want to join the Communist Party because it wasn't viewed as a kind of either a good thing to do or a way to get promoted or whatever. But now most of the high-performing students want to join, and of course, partly it's they have this desire to play a public role, and maybe it also helps to get good jobs and so on. So there's very, very strong competition to join to join the ruling organization. And when the students succeed, we're very happy for them, and naturally, because it's very, very challenging to join it now.
So what do you say to people who argue that the Chinese political system is not a good one, that it has to change and adopt a different system that is similar, for instance, to the Western-style liberal democracy? Can you understand why the political system that China is adopting now has worked for China, continues to deliver, and most likely will stay in place? Although, as you said, you don't think it is perfect, but it's something to build upon instead of to be overthrown as a whole system.
Sure. So, like every other political system, there are advantages and disadvantages, but we need to build on what's there and what works, and try to minimize the disadvantages. And China has no desire to export its political system. Unlike Western countries, which still have this kind of missionary impulse that there's only one morally legitimate way of choosing leaders, and it's by means of one person, one vote, and anything else is somehow authoritarian, and they lump up all the other countries, including China, North Korea, Myanmar, Saudi Arabia, they're all in the same camp. But China has it's flawed, of course, but it does have a political meritocracy. It has a very rigorous, decades-long process to select and promote leaders who are supposed to have above average ability and virtue. And yes, it's flawed, but it's important to build on that political meritocracy, and any effort to kind of overthrow it will, first of all, will not be successful and will be counterproductive, you know. And, I mean, there are some common values between China and the US. You know, for example, we believe in basic human rights, that we shouldn't kill innocent people. Torture is bad, slavery is bad, genocide is bad. I mean, we all agree on that. But when it comes to what's the right way of selecting political leaders, China has its own system, which has a long, I mean, yes, of course, it's since the Communist Revolution, but it has deeper roots as well, grounded in this very ancient idea of political meritocracy.
Would you say the political meritocracy is another form of democracy, just as one person, one vote may be considered for other societies?
Well, I think it has democratic characteristics, let's put it that way. There is an effort to consult the people and to have local level participation, but I don't think we should collapse the system and say that it's a kind of, it's just democracy. We don't have to use the same language that comes from, I mean, language of democracy, you know, Minju, it's fairly recent in Chinese history. And we don't have to use that language to try to persuade the Westerners, because I think they're never going to accept that, you know, China, because we don't use one person, one vote to choose systems, so it's not democratic. Fine. We have different, if by democracy you mean participation by the people, we have some of that. We also have a political meritocracy, which has advantages. All the leaders have political experience. They go through a long period of political training. They could plan for the long term and so on.
Yeah.
Yes, it's hard, but so that's my view. But I realize that not everybody agrees with my view.
Daniel Bell, former Dean of the School of Political Science and Public Administration of Shandong University, now Chair Professor of Political Theory at the Faculty of Law at the University of Hong Kong. My second case today is from a European scholar who has been studying China for decades. Beat Schneider, Professor Emeritus at the Bern University of the Arts in Switzerland, says the series of initiatives announced by China on development, security and civilization, respectively, offer the world a truly global perspective of Tianxia, or all under the heaven. I started by asking Professor Schneider how he understands the concept of Tianxia.
I think that China wants cooperation, and in the old thing of the Confucian tradition of Tianxia. And under the heaven, I think different systems are possible. They can cooperate together. So I think the conception of all under the heaven is the better conception for the future of mankind.
China has vowed to follow a unique Chinese path to modernization. Chinese President Xi Jinping said in the 20th National Congress report last October that we have put forward the Chinese dream of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and proposed promoting national rejuvenation through a Chinese path to modernization. So how do you understand, Professor Schneider, how do you understand this notion, and what are the implications for the world, the Chinese path to modernization?
C'est vraiment cette notion de modernisation que je développe dans mon...
It is the very notion of modernization that I look into in my book. I explain that China can always do two things at the same time, while Westerners can only focus on one thing.
Les Occidentaux ne peuvent seulement faire une chose.
Ça veut dire quoi? Il peut pas...
C'est vrai.
Il peut pas faire la cuisine et écouter la musique en même temps.
Non, ils ont adopté la modernisation.
They can't. The Chinese have adopted Western modernization and capitalism, but they have not been westernized. They have not changed everything in favor of capitalism and have remained true to themselves.
Alors, ils sont restés eux-mêmes. Comment? Parce qu'ils ont une grande tradition, une grande culture de
How?
5000 années.
Because of its great traditions and great culture, dating back 5,000 years,
Peut profiter
from which
parce
China
qu'elle
can benefit
peut
because it can
être-
make up a hybrid model.
peut faire un propre chemin de modernisation. C'est une modernisation hybride, on pourrait dire. Des skills.
Hybrid because it benefits from the capabilities of the West,
Elle a son propre,
but it also follows its own path.
ce mix de ma propre culture avec une modernisation.
This mixture of its own culture with a made in the West modernization provides vitality, and this vitality is a characteristic of China, which is strong thanks to this combination of culture and economy. So I think it is really a great strength.
De culture et économie. Donc, je pense que c'est vraiment une grande force.
What are the implications for the world? What would it mean for people in Switzerland, in the United States, in Germany, in Africa, in Latin America?
Je pense que les gens du Sud, alors des pays sous-développés, ils ont marre de.
I think that people in the South, in developing countries, are tired of US and European imperialism and colonialism, and they see an alternative path to development in which the state plays a large role. And the economy can develop, but not in the way it does in the West, and the people can benefit from it.
L'économie peut se développer, pas dans un sens de l'Ouest, mais dans un sens qui donne un profit pour le peuple. Je pense que l'Afrique, l'Amérique latine.
I think Africa, Latin America, and Asian countries look to China because there is a new path of development that offers a guarantee. The guarantee is that China has developed like no other country. It has become a great power.
D'où vient disons la garantie? La garantie, c'est que on peut observer que la Chine s'est développée comme pas d'autres pays. Elle a un succès.
I think the Chinese dream is really something different from the American dream, because the American dream was the dream of a few individuals. In contrast, the Chinese dream is the dream of the entire people.
Le rêve américain, c'était le rêve de quelques individus. Tandis que le rêve chinois, c'est le rêve de tout le peuple. Et aussi, c'est pour cela que c'est très.
That is why it is very attractive to African countries and countries in the global south. That's really something else.
Bert Schneider, Professor Emeritus at the Bern University of the Arts in Switzerland. My last case today is about the city of Dunhuang in northwest China's Gansu province. A treasure chest of ancient art and artifacts dating back to the first millennium, the city is located near where the ancient Silk Roads split into northern and southern routes. Here, one can find the largest collection of Buddhist art and precious manuscripts. I talked to the first full-time foreign researcher of Dunhuang Academy, American scholar Schmid, as well as Ning, Professor of Art History and Art Communication at Beijing Foreign Studies University, and David Ferguson, Honorary English Editor at Foreign Languages Press. I started by asking them to talk about their personal stories with Dunhuang.
Dunhuang is so enchanting. There's so much material here that it's easy in some ways to lose yourself. It's lose yourself in the art, the human creativity, the amount of historical documents that we find here. And so Dunhuang is a large data set, and there's nothing else like it in the world. Of course, it's a compendium of human creativity, and there's so much that you can do here in terms of asking questions and finding answers.
What is the question that you are most fascinated about? And did you find the answer yet?
Well, so there's a large question about how the caves were used. What actually happened in the caves, and I think it's a complex question, but it's one that, of course, visitors ask. Why did people create these caves? What were they doing in them? And the answer to that is rather complicated in certain ways. But part of the major reason why these caves were created were as acts of donation and gifts in a way to the Buddha, and to in terms of gaining salvation, in terms of improving the lives of the donors who created them.
And I also understand that there is very nuanced fusion of different cultures from the West, from the East, from Central Asia, from the Uyghur-speaking areas, from Eastern, from India, for instance, even as further west as Greek cultural elements, artistic elements were found in these places. How come?
How come? Well, Dunhuang is a point where so many cultures come together, right? It's at the end of the Heshi Corridor, on the Silk Road, of course, and it was a meeting point where all these confluences come together, and we see a great example of this mix of cultures, this kind of cosmopolitanism, especially in Cave 285. So in Cave 285, we have elements. There are Greek elements. There's Persian influence. There's Indian influence as well. We have Hindu deities. And of course, we have Buddhist deities as well, and even Taoism. So all these cultures in a single cave, all these cultures come together. And it's quite miraculous in some ways.
Yeah. How come that you, as an American scholar, became the first ever full-time researcher located to work in Dunhuang Academy? And how is life for you? How much longer do you want to stay?
I was here actually as a visiting scholar in 2017, and the director then, Director Wang Shudong, who's now the head of the Palace Museum, invited me to come and asked if I'd like to come on a permanent basis. And of course, I was extremely honored and said yes. And that was 5 years ago, so I've been here since then. And it's, I love Dunhuang, what can I say? It's such a magical place. And for me as a scholar, to be able to be here and to spend time, for example, in the caves, or work with my colleagues, who are all specialists in aspects of Dunhuang and Dunhuang studies, is incredible for me.
And after 35 years, this is still the case. The feeling
This
is
is
still
still the
so.
case.
The feeling is still so strong.
Absolutely, even more so, I think.
I'm going to go to Ning Qiang, Professor Ning Qiang, who also has a fascinating story with the Dunhuang Grotto, and he is actually a friend, and they used to work together, right? Professor Ning, you also went to Dunhuang many years ago, I understand, as early as in the 1980s, and you were a very, very young chap back then, and you just took the train, and you went there. What was that story?
I was an undergraduate student at Fudan University. I just saw a picture of Dunhuang, and then all of a sudden fell in love with this place. And then with the invitation of the director of Dunhuang Research Institute, Professor Duan, later he became my advisor. A professional advisor there. So I went to Dunhuang by train, and several days on the train, and then finally arrived there. I remember it's overnight. I slept in the hotel, and the next morning, sun bright. It's so beautiful and so impressive. And then the Director Duan, asked me a question. How do you feel about Dunhuang? My answer is, I want to die here.
Oh.
Then Mr. Duan just said, no, you are a person of Dunhuang. As Leo just said, it's overwhelming when you enter the caves. The color, the shape, and the story, everything just pumped into your head, into your eyes. It's overwhelming, and it's just like you get drunk. And that is the power of art.
Let me go to my third guest, David Ferguson. David, there is something quite unusual these days about artifacts, about traditional culture, about cultural conservation, about archaeology, is that it's all rage on the internet with the young people. Have you noticed that? I mean, I certainly do. What do you think explains that, if you have noticed?
First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here, Liu-Xin. And as you said, I haven't been to Dunhuang. I was supposed to go to Dunhuang as part of research work on a book I wrote about Gansu last year. And unfortunately, because of COVID, the trip was rescheduled and and Dunhuang came off the agenda, which is a pity because otherwise I'm sure I would have met Neil. It's a great pleasure to hear people like Neil and Professor Ning speaking with such passion and enthusiasm about Dunhuang and about culture and artifacts in general. I think there is definitely a growing interest. And I think in China it's important. And I think in China it's a reflection of a top-driven strategy. But you know that President Xi's great emphasis on Chinese culture.
Right.
That it's part of the four-sphere confidence that he talks about: confidence in China's socialist theory and path and system and culture. I think it's really important, and there's a very important reason why he does that. China went through a long period of oppression and suppression, from being the most powerful country in the world to a country that was occupied and poor. It takes a long time to build up confidence in a culture when you've been through that. And it's understandable that to a certain extent, China and the Chinese are rather tentative about their system and about their culture. Now, my book was specifically about rural revitalization and poverty alleviation. Mm-hmm. My book was reasons for confidence in China's system. But China's culture is just important. And it's a very old culture. Although I didn't visit Dunhuang itself, I did visit, for example, a museum in Tianshui.
Which is also in Gansu province.
Yeah, that's right. Now, one of the things that I was struck by there was the ancient pottery. You were looking at artifacts of an extreme level of sophistication that dated back a very long time. Now, China talks about 5,000 years of civilization and 5,000 years of culture. And it's an unfortunate fact that some critics in the West are either skeptical about this or even they tend to ridicule it. And I think it's really important that Chinese people are able to present their culture in an assertive way, not in a tentative way.
With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu-Xin, coming to you from Beijing. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu-Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got the point.